Welcome back to the Atomic Growth Team Deep Dive. I am Uncle Ray, and our mission here is simple. We want to help you become 1% better every single day.
That's right. I'm Susanna, and we've got a seriously incredible deep dive for you today.
Yeah, we really do. So I want you to imagine something for a second. Imagine spending half a century teaching millions of people how to master their emotions, build wealth, and just take absolute control of their lives.
Right, basically being known globally as this towering figure of optimism.
Exactly. You've coached heads of state, elite athletes, people going through their absolute darkest moments. But then you sit down for a candid interview and reveal that your biggest fear right now is that an entire generation is on the brink of losing their identity to technology.
Which is, that's a massive structural paradigm shift for someone who has literally built a career on human empowerment. It's a pretty striking pivot, Uncle Ray.
It really is. But looking closely to the source material we're pulling from today, this warning about massive societal disruption, it isn't coming from a place of, technological panic.
Right, no. It's rooted in a very specific historical understanding of how humans process suffering, and, more importantly, how we construct meaning.
Yeah. So to understand why this figure is sounding the alarm about our collective future, we have to look at how his own incredibly difficult past shaped his psychological framework.
Because his understanding of human behavior wasn't, developed in a university laboratory. It was forged in severe poverty.
Exactly. The sources detail an environment where there often just wasn't enough food in the house.
Yeah, and his mother, while she was caring, she was completely crushed by the psychological pressure of their financial reality. She really struggled with emotional volatility.
Right. And for a child in that kind of environment, survival basically means developing hypervigilance. He had to learn how to read the room instantly.
Yeah, like anticipating emotional explosions just by reading micro expressions and body language.
Just to de-escalate the tension before it erupted.
Yeah. And that kind of chronic childhood stress forces the brain to become incredibly efficient pattern recognition machine. Which brings us to this really pivotal Thanksgiving story highlighted in the interview.
Oh, this story is so powerful.
It really is. So they had no food. His parents were arguing bitterly behind closed doors about their situation. And then there's a knock at the door.
Right.
A stranger is standing there with bags of groceries and a frozen turkey, basically delivering a message that someone knows they're having a hard time and wants them to have a holiday meal.
And the reaction to that moment, Susanna, is what sets up his entire life's philosophy.
Yeah.
So the father looks at this delivery and filters it entirely through a lens of inadequacy. He processes this charity as proof of his own failure to provide.
Right, and his reaction is to angrily slam the door in the stranger's face.
Exactly. Meanwhile, the young boy is standing right there, witnessing the exact same physical event. But he sees a world where a total stranger is capable of immense unprompted kindness.
Same door, same turkey, same afternoon, but two completely divergent realities.
It's wild. And the thesis extracted from that single event forms the foundation of his whole psychological framework. He realized that in every waking moment, we are all making three simultaneous subconscious decisions.
Right, and we really need to pause on that for a second because this is so crucial for you listening. First, what are you going to focus on? Second, what does this mean? And third, what are you going to do about it?
Yes. The father focused on the charity, decided it meant he was worthless, and took the action of slamming the door.
While the boy focused on the kindness, decided it meant the world was a good place, and took the action of vowing to one day be the person feeding others.
It's like two people wearing different colored glasses, right? The event is exactly the same, but the reality they experience is completely different. But Susanna, how do we actually catch ourselves when we accidentally put on the shame glasses or the anger glasses?
Well, let's look at the actual mechanism of that, because it's not just a matter of, looking on the bright side. It's more like having an aggressive film editor living in your brain.
Well, I like that analogy.
Right. So the external world provides the raw footage, the neutral data. But your brain instantly splices it, adds a soundtrack of either triumph or tragedy, and outputs a finished movie that dictates your physiological response.
Yeah, and if the brain tags an event with a negative meaning, your body just floods with cortisol and adrenaline.
Exactly. But catching that editor in real time is incredibly difficult because your brain automates meaning making just to save energy.
Right. The brain prefers automation. So what we're really saying here is that the suffering most people experience isn't directly dictated by their circumstances. It's dictated by where their attention habitually lands.
And the meaning they automatically assign based on past trauma or social conditioning.
So interrupting that pattern requires active, conscious friction. When you feel that physiological spike of anger or despair, you have to force a manual override and ask, what else could this data mean?
Because you are the sole author of the meaning.
Yeah. And if we apply that concept of automated meaning at a societal scale, the transition into his current fears makes total sense.
Oh, absolutely.
Because we don't just automate the meaning of a Thanksgiving turkey. Right? We automate the meaning of our own existence.
Yeah, for thousands of years, humans have tied their core identity to their labor. When you meet someone, the default question is always, what do you do?
Right. We don't say, I drive trucks or I analyze data. We say, I am a driver. I am an analyst.
The labor is the identity.
Exactly. And that is precisely why the incoming wave of artificial intelligence is viewed in these sources as a crisis of meaning, not just an economic shift.
AI is rapidly displacing cognitive and physical labor across the spectrum, from logistics to top-tier quantitative finance.
And when those roles vanish, people aren't simply losing an income stream. They're staring at a blank screen, stripped of the easiest answer to the hardest human question, which is, who are you?
Yeah. When the external structure that provided your identity collapses, the internal psychological editor doesn't know how to process the raw footage of your life anymore.
But, the pushback to that anxiety is usually historical precedent. Like, we went through the Industrial Revolution, right?
Right, machines replace physical labor.
Artisans lost their livelihoods, there was massive social upheaval, but eventually society recalibrated. We created new industries and moved forward. So why is this time so catastrophic?
The source material argues that this time is structurally different and it hinges entirely on the velocity of the change.
The speed.
Exactly. The velocity alters the fundamental physics of societal adaptation. The shift from an agrarian society to an industrial one played out over decades.
Right. Human beings had multiple generations to adjust their educational systems, their cultural norms, and their identities.
But the AI revolution is compressing that timeline into a fraction of a single generation's working life. We are essentially asking human psychology to adapt faster than its biological capacity allows.
Wow. And there's also an entirely new variable in this technological shift that didn't exist during the steam age.
Yeah, the virtual world.
Exactly. If a 19th century textile worker lost their job, they still had to engage with the physical world to survive. Today, if people lose their professional purpose, there's a very real alternative waiting for them: the frictionless virtual world.
And that concept of a frictionless existence is perhaps the most chilling warning in the interview. If the real world becomes too difficult, if the friction of rebuilding an identity is just too painful, technology is ready to offer customized, perfectly tailored virtual realities.
Imagine AI companions that never disagree with you.
Right?
Algorithms that constantly validate your worldview, and immersive environments where you literally never face rejection.
It sounds like a utopia until you realize that biological systems require friction to grow. I mean, muscles atrophy in zero gravity.
Oh, that's such a great point, Susanna. If an entire generation opts out of the friction of reality because the virtual world is easier, we lose the psychological resilience required to sustain a civilization.
So the crucial question becomes, if our old frameworks of identity and skill are obsolete, how do we navigate this without retreating?
Well, the sources point to the one human capacity that AI currently struggles to replicate natively. And that's our ability to learn with deep, cross-disciplinary context.
Right. The proposed antidote is mastering 3 distinct levels of learning.
Let's break those down.
So the first level is pattern recognition. This is about observing the cyclical nature of life, or the seasons, to eliminate the paralysis of fear.
Like how early humans lived in constant terror of winter until they recognized the pattern of the seasons.
Exactly. Once winter was understood as a temporary cycle rather than an apocalypse, they could prepare for it. The same applies to technological and economic winters.
Okay, so once you recognize the season, you move to the second level, which is pattern utilization.
Right. This is where you bypass the trial and error phase by studying the most effective people in a given field, deconstructing their specific behaviors, and applying those patterns to your own circumstances.
You don't need to invent the concept of shelter, you just need to learn how the best builders construct it.
Sexually. Which leads to the third and highest tier, pattern creation. This is the synthesis phase.
This is taking the recognized patterns from multiple disparate fields and combining them to generate something entirely unprecedented. This is the realm of true human leverage, right?
Yeah, because AI is exceptionally good at pattern utilization. It can analyze millions of data points to optimize an existing process.
But synthesizing lived human experience, emotional nuance, and cross-domain knowledge to create a new paradigm, that remains a uniquely human frontier.
I love your analogy for this, Uncle Ray, about learning music.
Oh yeah, it's like pattern recognition is simply tapping your foot, right? Understanding the underlying rhythm of a song.
Yeah.
Pattern utilization is learning to read sheet music and executing someone else's composition perfectly. But pattern creation is putting the sheet music away, feeling the energy of the room, and improvising an entirely original piece of jazz.
An algorithm can play the sheet music flawlessly, but it cannot invent the soul of the jazz because it doesn't have a life to draw inspiration from.
Exactly. And the underlying philosophy here is that humans are fundamentally designed to create, not merely to manage.
Right. The modern era has trapped millions of people in a state of perpetual management. We manage our time, we manage our overflowing inboxes, we manage our stress levels,
And the sources argue that when humans are reduced to pure management, our psychological drive withers. We only truly come alive when we step into the role of creator.
which provides a very clear, actionable step for you listening to this deep dive right now. To build that creation muscle, you don't need to quit your job tomorrow.
No, definitely not.
The recommendation is to carve out just 15 minutes a day for active microlearning.
Just 15 minutes, not passive consumption, not doom scrolling, but intentionally studying a new pattern, reading a difficult text, or practicing a skill completely outside your current domain.
But to maintain the discipline for that, the sources suggest we need to understand the emotional fuel driving our behavior, which brings us to the framework of the 6 human needs.
Right. This framework suggests that every human action, no matter how complex, is an attempt to meet one or more of these 6 universal needs.
And they are certainty, uncertainty or variety, significance, love and connection, growth, and contribution.
And a person will literally violate their own values if it means meeting these core needs.
Yeah. And the need for significance seems particularly weaponized in the modern landscape.
Oh, 100%. The desire to feel unique, important, or needed is a powerful driver. But social media platforms appear engineered to exploit this specific need.
Offering what the sources call cheap significance.
Yeah, cheap significance. You can achieve a fleeting sense of power or importance by tearing someone else down, posting a hypercritical comment, or participating in outrage, all from the safety of a screen with zero real-world risk.
And that mechanism explains the paradox of the modern age, Uncle Ray. Why a society more hyper-connected than any in human history is simultaneously experiencing unprecedented levels of isolation and depression.
Because the trap is that the need for significance is often in direct opposition to the need for love and connection.
Right. Exactly. The more a person demands to be seen as significant, the more they center their own ego and tear others down to elevate themselves, the more they repel genuine reciprocal connection. Cheap significance is just empty calories for the human psyche.
Which is why the framework highlights growth and contribution as the only 2 needs that carry zero negative externalities.
Yes.
When you shift your focus from how can I be important to how can I contribute to someone else, the internal architecture of your mind changes.
The hypercritical, anxious voice that constantly monitors your own status goes quiet when you are entirely focused on solving a problem for someone else.
It really brings the discussion full circle back to that Thanksgiving story.
Yeah, it does. The transformation of that young boy was rooted in contribution. He took a moment that could have generated a lifetime of shame and converted it into a mission to feed others.
However, the sources are pragmatic. They acknowledge that while a grand mission of contribution provides the psychological fuel, executing that mission in the real world requires resources.
It requires capital.
Right. And this is where the emotional philosophy intersects with hard, practical strategy. The sources distill insights from top self-made investors into 4 core principles for wealth building.
So if the first half of this discussion was about protecting your psychological capital, this is about building your literal capital.
And the first rule is heavily defensive. Prioritize not losing money.
The mathematics of loss dictate this rule. Human intuition assumes that if you lose 50% of your money, you just need a 50% gain to get it back.
Right. But the reality of compounding is much harsher. If you invest $1,000 and lose half, you are at $500. A 50% gain on that $500 only brings you to $750.
You need a 100% gain just to return to baseline. Catastrophic losses permanently damage your compounding potential, which is why elite investors focus obsessively on downside protection before they ever look at potential profits.
Okay, so if rule one is pure defense, the second rule shifts to calculated offense, seeking asymmetric risk and reward.
But Uncle Ray, for someone outside the world of hedge funds and venture capital, how does that principle actually apply to everyday financial decisions?
That's a great question, Susanna. Asymmetric risk simply means looking for opportunities where the potential upside vastly outweighs the potential downside.
Okay.
Instead of risking a dollar to make a dollar, you look for scenarios where you risk a dollar to make five. The power of a 5-to-1 asymmetry is that you can be completely wrong 4 times in a row, and if you are right on the fifth attempt, you still break even.
Wow, it really removes the paralyzing pressure of needing to be perfect.
Exactly. In practical terms, for a normal person, this might mean starting a side business that requires sweat equity and a very small amount of capital, but has the potential to scale, rather than taking out a massive, high-interest loan to open a physical storefront.
That makes a lot of sense. And that transitions perfectly into the third rule, true diversification. We often hear that we need a diverse portfolio, but buying 20 different tech stocks isn't diversification.
Definitely not. If the entire technology sector experiences a downturn, that entire portfolio collapses simultaneously.
True diversification requires holding uncorrelated assets. You want investments that react differently to the same economic weather.
Right, if equities take a massive hit, you want to hold other asset classes, perhaps real estate, commodities, or specific types of bonds that hold their value or even rise during that exact same shock.
The goal is to construct a financial ship with multiple watertight compartments. If one breaches, the ship doesn't sink.
Which brings us to the fourth rule, and arguably the most profound mindset shift in the financial segment of the sources, making the transition from a consumer to an owner.
Yeah, modern society trains us from birth to be exceptionally efficient consumers of value. We buy the latest gadgets, subscribe to the services, and consume the content.
But the math of being a pure consumer guarantees that your capital is constantly flowing away from you.
Yeah.
The sources use a brilliant thought experiment to illustrate the alternative. Consider the flagship smartphone you likely have in your pocket right now.
Right. If you calculate the cost of buying every new iteration of that phone since its initial release, you've likely spent tens of thousands of dollars over the years functioning purely as a consumer.
The value flowed from your bank account directly to the tech company.
But if you had taken that exact same amount of cash and purchased stock in the company, if you had chosen to become an owner rather than a consumer, that investment would be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars today.
It represents a fundamental restructuring of your economic reality. The question changes from, what can I buy with my money, to how can I capture and own a piece of the economic value that is being generated around me?
Whether you are buying fractional shares of a business, acquiring an asset that produces yield, or building your own intellectual property, you are shifting from the side of the table that pays for value to the side of the table that captures it.
Absolutely. Now, before we wrap this up, if you are finding value in this deep dive and you want to keep becoming 1% better every day, please take a quick second to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone who needs to hear it.
Yeah, and leave a comment below. We love hearing from you guys.
We really do. So as we synthesize all these source materials, a very clear, cohesive through line emerges here. This isn't just a collection of random self-help tips or financial hacks.
No, it is a unified manual for sovereignty in an age of extreme disruption.
We started by looking at how the brain automatically assigns meaning and how we must manually override that process to choose our own focus.
We examine how the unprecedented speed of artificial intelligence threatens to strip away our professional identities.
We then explored the mechanics of adaptation. To survive the loss of old identities, we must graduate from merely recognizing and utilizing patterns to actively creating them.
We have to guard against the hollow dopamine of cheap significance on social media and root our psychology in the sustainable fuel of growth and contribution.
And finally, we ground those lofty psychological goals in the mathematics of survival, protecting our downside, seeking asymmetric upside, and aggressively transitioning from consumers of the world into owners of it.
It is a blueprint for refusing to be a passive participant in the future.
It really is. And as we wrap up this deep dive, we always want to leave you with a final thought, something to turn over in your mind long after you stop listening.
Yeah.
We talked extensively about the financial concept of asymmetric risking a little to potentially gain a lot. But consider how that exact same mathematical principle applies to the human experience.
Oh, it is a powerful translation of the concept.
Right. Think about the times you hold back from asking a question because you don't want to look foolish. Or the times you hesitate to express genuine appreciation to someone because it feels vulnerable.
The downside risk is a fleeting moment of awkwardness, a tiny, temporary emotional cost.
But the upside? The upside is learning a crucial piece of knowledge that changes your trajectory. The upside is forging a connection that lasts a lifetime.
The asymmetric risk of human vulnerability is the greatest investment strategy you possess.
Risk the moment of awkwardness. The potential return is infinite. Start your 15 minutes of microlearning today and take that step toward becoming a creator. Thank you for joining us as we unpack these sources, and we will see you on the next deep dive.
Bye, everyone.